Good morning, Phil.
Ah,
How's it going, Phil?
I'm well. I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank
It's
you for
nice to
coming on,
be
Phil.
on.
It's great to sit down and pick your brains, really, mate. It's really great to I've been watching a little bit of your career for a good few years now, watching from lick library things to and obviously recently, taking on the Westlife gig, um,
Mm,
which is an amazing achievement, and I'm sure you're very proud of that. But yeah, just been watching your sort of career because I believe just go back, Phil, because I believe like a good few years ago, I remember you winning a competition. Is that right? Is that how it all started for you?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, things really kind of started to happen for me at the back end of 2016. There was the Guitar Idol competition,
That's right.
which
That's it.
hosted by the Library guys, and I first came across that competition 2009 or 2008, something like that. I think the first one I ever saw was when Jack Thamarat, I hope I've pronounced his surname correctly, but Jack Thamarat won it. And, he was kind of one of the sort of the first of those kind of guys, like sort of the young, modern, up and coming sort of online guitar players doing Jam Track Central and Lick Library, and he's still out kind of playing and stuff as well. He kind of has a broad range, but that was when I first came across a competition, and then initially, I thought, oh, it'd be so cool to enter that one day, but it's like, oh, I need to get a lot better first, and I was a fresher at college at that time as well, 2008, and I had to sort out a lot of things in my own playing. But in 2014, they ran the competition again, and I wanted to enter it then. And I
Okay.
filmed my entry video, but I was too late to submit. So I
Right.
followed the page on Facebook and was like, if they ever run it again, I'm going to make it so that it notifies me it's happening. And then in 2016, it was, oh, we're running this competition. I was like, great, I'm going to get my video in straight away. So I was quite lucky because I already had it there. So I think I was like within the first 10 people to submit an entry. I was like
Yeah.
really early on. But yeah, that's where it all kind of started.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, anyone would say you were super prepared for that. Then you had literally had a video ready to drop.
Yeah,
That's great. I mean, that's really cool. I mean, and you won that competition, didn't you? Is that right?
I did. Yeah, I managed to get first place, which I'll be honest, genuinely came as a welcome surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I'm not a terrible guitar player. I think I can play okay. So I anticipate getting a little way down the road. But,
Yeah.
even if I just get a couple of stages down the road, I'd be really thrilled with that. And the thing was, I'd actually, yeah, so that was 2016. 2013, I had taken a year out from playing music, um, and had kind of dropped out of the scene. And a little bit of my backstory, like I grew up playing guitar in church, bit of a church guitar player.
Right.
And in 2013, I thought I would sort of try and go down the church, sort of praise and worship, church kind of guitar route. Tried that for a year. And after a year of that, I thought, no, actually, I really want to go back to pursuing a playing career. But at that point, I'd kind of dropped out of the scene. People assumed I'd left London, wasn't kind of really doing very much. And I tried to start rebuilding things, was doing a little bit of teaching, was trying to do some function gigs, but not very much was happening. So 2016, I thought, man, this isn't working. I'm just not making a living. Maybe I should knock this on the head and do something else.
Wow.
And so it was kind of a last hurrah, really. It was well, I've got the video. It's already been done. I'd missed the boat 2 years earlier. Let's just have a go. We'll see what happens. And hopefully, even if it just helps some of my peers go, oh, Phil's still knocking about playing the guitar. Oh yeah, maybe I'll call him for a wedding gig. That was kind of what I was hoping would come out of it. Really, I had quite low expectations in that regard. And then, it just kind of seemed to keep going. Made it to the top 100. I thought, wow, that's awesome. I'm thrilled with that. And then made it into the top 25. And was really thrilled with that. And then the next category after that was top 7. I don't know why it was top 7 and not top 10, but it was the top 7 category of players, and I very nearly missed my opportunity actually, because Jonathan Graham, who's the editor at Guitar Interactive magazine and over at Lick Library, he tried to message me on Facebook Messenger 3 or 4 times, but you know how it is if you're not like Facebook friends with somebody.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
It goes into the junk. So I just missed his messages, and then he'd sent me a friend request, and to my shame, I didn't know who he was, but I accepted the friend request, and then he sent me another message, and I thought, oh my days, I've missed all of these things. He's like, please, can you let me know ASAP, like if you actually do you want to come to the live final, you know, and then we'll put you in the live final. I was like, yes, of course I want to be in the live final. So I was just thrilled that I'd been selected to be one of the finalists, and I didn't anticipate. To my mind, I'd won in the sense of, wow, I've made it into the top category. Yeah. That's amazing. You know, regardless of what happens on the night, just to have got that far, you know, I'm thrilled that they thought I was good enough to be there with 6 other, you know, really amazing guitar players. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story of how that all came about, really.
I think it's an amazing story that you were at the point where you just said you were potentially thinking about it wasn't working. You were going to give things up and think, right, that's not it. It's not working for me. And then that video that you had already prepared is a last-ditch attempt. You thought, no, I'm going to put that in. That changed your career massively. Like, you know, I imagine after that competition and winning that competition, I imagine doors started opening up for you. You know.
Yeah, very much so. I think the first immediate door that opened was my old lecturers from my old music college. It doesn't exist anymore. Well, it was Tech Music Schools, for people who remember Tech Music Schools on our scene in West London. That's now BIMM London, kind of the big BIMM machine. Mm-hmm. Bought it out and stuck their sticker on the front door. But it was they kind of absorbed the tech schools thing into their big cog, basically. But those guys got in touch and said, you know, would you be interested in starting out doing a little bit of teaching at college? You know, we'll bring you in as a dep and just kind of see how it goes. And that was kind of one of my old mentors, really, my old techniques instructor, a guy called Jim Clark, who is a phenomenal player, phenomenal teacher as well. Just one of those teachers who is particularly gifted at equipping students with how to do the thing. You know, there's lots of great teachers who are great at demonstrating and explaining the concept.
Yep.
But it's a little bit hard for you to absorb it for yourself. He's really good at showing you how you absorb it and how you develop it. And, you know, he's really good at that. So he kind of said, why don't you come in, start doing a few bits and pieces? And that was, you know, that was great, because I was doing a bit of teaching, but it was an opportunity to teach something a little bit more meaty and quite intimidating, I'll be honest, as well. You know, so that was kind of the first thing. And then doing stuff with Lick Library. So off the back of that, I did a couple of products with Lick Library and started doing some gear demos with Guitar Interactive magazine and doing that kind of stuff. And then people remembered that I was around, so the function gigs started to pick up, and I was actually out playing and starting to meet some really good players. And it's like, oh, this is working now. I'm kind of, you know, there's various different things, and that's all kind of taking off. And in regards to like doing pop session work, like in my early 20s, I really wanted to do that kind of thing. And I'd had a couple of sort of small things that I'd done, but nothing that had really ever kind of taken off. And I kind of got to a point where I thought that side of being a musician, that's probably just not going to happen for me. Like it's just not quite worked out. I've maybe missed the boat on auditions and things. And I think I had this misconception in my head that unless you got into that side of things in your early 20s, mm-hmm. then you kind of missed the boat, because most players, what I thought I saw was you get a gig in your early 20s, like 19, 20, 22, and then you stay with that artist for a number of years. You kind of grow with that artist, and you're in that scene.
Yeah.
Maybe you hop onto another gig, but they're artists who they've grown at that sort of similar stage, and everybody's kind of moving together. And I guess there's an element of truth to that. So I kind of thought, well, it's not going to happen for me, but I've got this really great opportunity to kind of go into the nerdy sort of guitar land, guitar side of things, with guitar education and Lick Library and doing videos and lessons and that side of things. But I mean, I was just thrilled that it was starting to work, and I could actually pay my rent with a guitar, which is, you know, kind of the dream for many of us, isn't it? Is just to be able to do that.
Have you ever thought, Phil, what you might do if that wouldn't have worked? What you might have done? Did you have to think back then what you might have done differently if you'd have a different career? Have you ever thought about what you might do?
Well, at that time, I really had no idea what I would do. In 2016, it's like, well, what do I do? Like, do I just, I don't know, do I apply for a retail job? Or I never considered myself particularly, I never considered myself particularly academic necessarily. You know, like, I know lots of great musicians who've got massive brains as well. You know, they did really good in school and got like really amazing grades. I did okay in school. I wasn't terrible, but I kind of did okay. But I found academia quite a slog. It wasn't something I was particularly drawn to. And that's what I enjoyed about music college, was they didn't really care about my academia. They just cared if I could do the thing. And so I was like, great, brilliant, because, you know, I've got like a very sort of normal set of GCSEs, but I kind of bombed my A levels, really. I didn't kind of do very well with that. But yeah, so I mean, that's a bit of a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I'm not really sure.
What was the prize, Phil, for that competition? What was the prize?
Yeah, the prize, there were quite a lot of prizes actually, which is pretty great because I was skint and had a very small amount of gear. So there was a PRS CE22, which was like their new sort of bolt-on sort of PRS design. So it was a full fat US PRS, but at kind of half the cost of like a custom 22 sort of thing. But it was a cool guitar. I didn't actually hang on to it for that long. I didn't end up gelling with it that well in the end, but it was a very cool guitar. So there was that. There was the Eventide sort of equivalents to the Strymon triple threat. So the Eventide, I can't remember what they were called now. Space Designer, I think, was their sort of big reverb, big delay pedal, and a modulation pedal. So kind of their equivalent to the Strymon Big Sky Timeline and what's it called? The Mod Factor. No, that was the Eventide one.
Was it the Mobius? Is it?
The Mobius, thank you. That was the one. Yeah. I was like, I've got it in this room somewhere. I've forgotten what it's called. The Mobius. So there was those. There was I think a box of like 50 rotor sound sets of strings. There's like, you know, a couple of years worth of strings. There was a Marshall Silver Jubilee combo. Nice. There was an acoustic guitar as well. There was a couple of other stomp pedals, some kind of like vintage inspired rotor sound stomp pedals they were like the size of a wah-wah pedal, but just a stomp pedal. I mean, they were quite like not that. I mean, they sounded great. They just weren't very pedalboard friendly. You know, they took up so much space, but they did sound cool. But yeah, I think there were a few other things I can't remember now.
You must have thought you won the lottery, Phil, to winning all that.
I did, to be fair, I did. I was like, wow, you know. And at that point, I had one guitar. I had my faithful Fender Strat, and that was it. And was like, I don't even have a spare guitar. You know, if this guitar needs to go to the shop, and it's 2-week turnaround, like I can't work for 2 weeks. You know, it was. So I was just thrilled to have a little bit more gear.
Yeah, that's amazing. Phil, take us along there, mate. So how does the call come about then? That, you know, Westlife are looking for maybe a new guitarist to go on tour. How does that come about? Did you get a call from somebody, or did someone put your name forward? How did that work?
Yeah, it's a really good story actually, because I think it just highlights that everybody's route into doing kind of pop session work. It's just so unique and different for every person. So I got put forward for it by an old friend of mine, a guy called Dan Story, who's a great rock guitar player. Well, just a great guitar player in general, but his DNA is rock guitar. Really, really wonderful player. And in my early 20s, he's nearly 10 years older than me. So in my early 20s, he kind of had taken me under his wing a bit and was a little bit of a mentor. And I'd learned a lot of just kind of how to play from him, but he'd kind of given me some opportunities. And he would occasionally ask me to depth for him for gigs that he was doing. And sometimes it would work out and sometimes it wouldn't. You know, they'd end up going with someone else that they already knew, even though he'd kind of put me forward. But sort of my dalliances with the pop industry in my early 20s had really come through him. He'd kind of really been the person who'd opened that door. And that was how I ended up getting the Westlife gig, because he got called for the gig because they'd had a 7-year hiatus and they wanted to go back out on tour again. So 2019 was their like reunion tour after a 7-year break. So they were putting their band back together. And the previous person who's done the gig is usually the first call. Usually the first call back was kind of how it works. And the guy who'd done it, I think in 2011 and 12, was a guy called Ben Jones, who I think will be a well-known name to most people listening to this podcast. He's, I think in recent years, he's been playing for Tom Jones. He was the house guitarist for The Voice for a little while as well. He was kind of in the house band. I've never actually met him, but I've seen him play a few times and known him by reputation. But so he'd been doing it before, but he was unavailable because he was in the middle of a world tour with Tom Jones at the time, I think. So my mate Dan had been called, but he wasn't available to do the gig. And they were like, "Oh, we're really looking for like a shredder type guitar player. That's what we're after." So he said, "Oh, you should give my mate Phil a call. Like he'd actually be a really great fit for that type of player if that's what you want." So, and I hadn't spoken to him for about 5 years actually. I think we'd like had a little bit of chat on social media, but it'd been a really long time since I'd spoken to him. So he phoned me kind of out of the blue. It's like, "Oh, hey Dan, what's going on?" He's like, "Oh, I've got a gig for you if you're interested. It's for a tour." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And he's like, "It's for Westlife." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah, I've been offered the gig, but I can't do it. But I've put you forward. Would you be okay with me passing your number on to the bass player who's fixing the band?" And I was like, "Yeah, obviously, of course I'm okay with that." And they were looking to lock it down quite quick. So the bass player, a guy called Freddie Thompson, he phoned me and said, "I got your phone number from Dan. Dan says you're the guy. Are you the guy?" And I'm going, yeah. No, I'm the guy. I can do it. And in my head, I'm thinking, perhaps a little bit naively, I mean, I just won Guitar Idol. How hard can it be to play Westlife song? Surely it should be kind of okay.
Yes.
Like, I can. I can do it. It's like, okay, I'm looking for a proper guitar player. You know, I'm not messing around here. You know, you need to be able to. You need all the sounds. You need to be able to play acoustic. You need all the bits. You know, I'm not mucking about. And I was like, no, I can do that. And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to pass on your details to the production manager, and he'll call you. You know, probably by the weekend. If you don't hear from him, he's decided to go with somebody else. So just keep an eye out for this phone call. You know, anyway, good luck," sort of thing. And that was kind of how the conversation went. And I thought, let me send him a few things. And I depped for Dan in 2011 when he used to be Chipmunk's guitar player back in the day.
Okay.
And I depped for him on a show, and I had some video footage of me doing some outro solos on that gig. So I thought, I'll send him the Guitar Idol live video, but I'll send him that as well so he can see me sort of in an industry setting. And it was kind of interesting talking to him because he was kind of saying that actually the video he sent was just the Guitar Idol video. And it's interesting how you can perceive things differently, because I perceived the Chipmunk gig as being sort of more credible because it was on a gig playing in a band, not just me playing over my own backing track. And it was
Yes.
on, on a big stage and things. But to him, he said, well, Westlife are up here in terms of legacy, and Chipmunk's an amazing artist, but he's a younger artist. He's not yet achieved the same sort of level of thing. So
yeah,
I'm not going to send them that, because they want someone who they maybe perceive as having a certain amount of experience or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Which kind of makes sense. Yeah, maybe that's a bit disingenuous. Maybe that's just more how I would perceive it. But anyway, they saw the video. They sent the video of my Guitar Idol performance to the actual guys, and they really liked it. And so they said, yes, we would really like you to book him. He's exactly the sort of guitar player that we're looking for, which was just pretty wild. I mean, that was just pretty crazy. So, I got a phone call from a production manager saying, I got your number from Freddie Thompson. I'd like to book you for this tour. Can you call me back ASAP and let me know if you're available? And my jaw kind of hit the floor. I was like, so I called him back, and we discussed all the details and everything, and then sent through the schedule, and then that was kind of that. So it kind of came out of nowhere, really, which for a lot of people will be quite an unsatisfying story, in the sense of, like, there's no blueprint that I can hand to anyone and say, well, this is what I did, and if you follow these steps, then the same thing can happen. I think the only thing I would say is, like, how was I in a position to get called for that? Well, I just happened to be in the right environment and know the right sort of people in those circles, so that then at some point I just was fortunate enough to get that call. But I would say I was extremely lucky to get that call. The way that I got the gig was very tenuous in that regard, and because no one really knew me in that world either. I kind of didn't realize this until a little bit later on, but they do, like, on big tours like that, for big gigs, the rehearsal period is quite a long time, 4 to 6 weeks quite often. So there's a lot of stuff to work out. So the first couple of weeks is just band rehearsals in London without the artist there. And it wasn't until a little bit later on, but kind of the bass player, he'd sort of said to me, he said, Phil, you're doing a good job, mate. Stop stressing. Like, you're supposed to be here. It's okay. I know it's your first time, and you're feeling insecure about whether you're good enough to be here. If you weren't good enough, I'd have sent you home in the London rehearsals, and I'd have got somebody else in.
Yes. So
the fact that you're here in the second phase means that you're supposed to be here. So I was like, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, well, we'll try him out, and if he doesn't work out, we can still call someone else in. Which I'm glad did, but that would have been very awkward for me, because at that point I'd been like, hitting up Ibanez Guitars, going, oh, I'm doing this tour, can I have an endorsement? And if it had all fallen through. But that's essentially the story of how that came about.
Can I go back a little bit? So you get given the call, and you're saying that basically, give me a call back ASAP. You're on the tour, if you're up for it, sort of thing. You got to go through a range of emotions, from like, oh my God, I can't believe this, to excitement, to there must be an element of self-doubt there. There must have been. I would imagine, like, you must be like, can I do this? Am I the right person for this? Because I would be the same. If I had that call, it's always a dream to get that call. And if I did get a call like that, it would be like, that's amazing, so excited. And then I'll be like, hang on a minute, am I the right guy for this job? Like, just self-doubt would creep in. Was there an element of that for you? There must have been a little bit, or?
Yeah, no, there definitely was. There really, really was. And it's that funny thing where it's like you can play, and when you've been playing professionally as long as you and I have, like, you have quite a clear sense of what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And this is a terrible way of thinking about it. I think it's so unhelpful, but you kind of know where you sit on the ladder of ability. Yes. Within the professional community, right? So you're not sort of, so you're more naturally going to fall into imposter syndrome rather than the Dunning-Kruger effect of thinking you're more than you are. Like, most of us who work professionally, actually, we're we're at a point where we're so aware of what we don't know,
Yeah.
and so aware of so many incredible players out there who play really differently to us or play things that we can't play and all of that kind of thing, that we spend a lot of time just feeling like everyone's going to find out that I'm not really that good. That's kind of the thought, you know. So I very much had that thought, and I think that first tour was quite instrumental in just helping me learn a little bit of self-confidence. And the thing that was great about working on a gig with older players who are much more experienced was, rather than with guys who are maybe the same age as me, was that there was a little bit more kind of mentoring, like natural mentoring going on. And Freddie will always have a particularly special place in my heart, because he really took me under his wing in that whole process and was like, you know, I really want to see you succeed, and let me kind of encourage you that you are playing well. And, you know, because I had that thought of, I know I can play, but am I what they're used to? Am I the standard guitar player that they're used to having?
Yes.
Am I playing things in the way that they would expect? Is my sort of headspace in the right place with it? And I'm a classic overthinker, you know, as well. So I just kind of really get myself into a stew. And, you know, how many mistakes can you make before you get fired, and things like that, and being really stressed about that. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist myself. So, you know, in rehearsals, really stressing if I've made a mistake, because I feel like nobody else is making mistakes. I feel like it'd be just me. And then I feel stressed about being the one pulling the team down. And, you know, the guys did have to take me aside a couple of occasions and just tell me to like chill out, and that it's okay, and that people make mistakes, and that's fine. And you know, and just to, I think that the most helpful thing that they helped me with was just be a little bit more comfortable in trusting that I had the skills to do the job, and that there's a kind of a difference between, because it's very like English culture, isn't it? Like, don't blow your own trumpet, don't tell people that you're good at something, because that's arrogant.
Yeah.
You know, but I think arrogance is saying I'm the best and nobody else can do it as well as I can. That's what arrogance is.
Yeah.
Whereas confidence is, I'm good at this and I can do it.
Yes.
And there's a distinction between those two things, because saying I'm good at this and I can do it, you're not saying I'm the only one who can do it. I'm not saying that there's no one out there who can do it better than me, but actually I can do it, and I can do it to a really good standard and to the necessary standard, and I can do it really well.
Yes.
But arrogance is, nobody else could do it like me. And it's when you start getting over to, hey, you know, I'm the best, no one can do it like me, and you're kind of swaggering a bit, that's where you're setting yourself up for a fall potentially.
Yeah.
You know? So it's treading that line is important to get right, but also self-detriment. Oh no, I'm terrible. Well, you're not terrible. Actually, you know, you're a professional musician, so you're not rubbish, are you? You know, it's a hard thing to get right, I think. But
and do you get, I've got so many questions about this, but do you get sent the songs to you? Do you get like a list of songs you're going to do potentially on the tour that you have to go away and learn? Do you get links to the files or the tracks you need to, how does that work? Do you get sent the songs, or do they just go, right, go and learn all of Westlife's back catalogue, don't know which ones we're going to do, but you need to know all of them just in case? How does that work, Phil?
Yeah, it's a really good question. From talking to other musicians, it varies from gig to gig, but with them, the way it works is, because they have so many hits, their live show is made up of all of their number ones, all of their big hits. And if they release a new single, that new single will be included. But they have so many that they have to work out which ones they're going to do. So when I first got the gig, the production manager sent me 2 set lists, which I think might have been either provisional set lists for that tour or previous set lists, that basically contained all of their big hits. That they won't play all of them, but they will play most of them.
Yeah.
And so I basically, I'm a bit of an over prepper as well, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So, you know, I was like, okay, rehearsals start in like 3 months. So straight away, I'm making a playlist on Spotify of all of those songs, and that's all I'm listening to. I want to know the songs inside out.
Yeah.
I'm learning as many, and there's not loads of guitar parts on the studio versions either. That's the thing, you know. So it's mostly acoustic or kind of, you know, a couple of jangly guitar things, but there's not a lot of written guitar work on there. So I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how this is going to be approached, but I'm just going to learn all the chord progressions. I'm going to learn maybe like significant instrumental lines or hooks that maybe they're in the string parts. Who knows, they might ask me to play that as a lead line, or maybe they won't, I don't know. But I'm just going to try and just learn as much of the tracks as I can in detail, so that then when we're in rehearsals, I'm not going, oh, which song is that? Is that the one that goes this way? And is that the one in this key? It's just more, okay, I know the song. This is how we're tweaking it. This is the new direction. And just to make life easier for myself, I think. So I kind of did all that. But then about a month before rehearsals, the musical director, Simon, he arranges the show. And so he will mock up like a demo version of what he thinks the live version will sound like, and pretty much map out the ideas, because there's a lot of moving parts. There's also the show designers involved, so they'll be thinking about things like how long is the intro going to be, and are we going to have this kind of VT screen intro, exciting stuff. And so sometimes they'll go back to the musical director and say, oh yeah, actually we need like an extra minute of music here, so like, okay, how can I flesh out the intro a bit longer, and what can I add it? So there's like, the way that it's musically arranged is there's a lot of moving parts all interconnected about those kinds of decisions that get made, which is quite interesting to observe, and like a huge job actually. I mean, I'm glad I wasn't the one having to do it. I mean, but Simon is one of the most experienced musical directors in the industry. You know, he's been doing it for 25, 30 years, worked with loads of the really huge bands. So he can work really fast. It's really quite incredible. Just program stuff up really fast. And so he'll send out those arrangements. They're kind of first draft arrangements, I guess. And they'll change a little bit depending on what the guys think. So we'll rehearse through the parts in the London rehearsals, and then they'll come in and listen, and then they'll say, yeah, that's really cool, we love that, or actually we feel like we want to push in a different direction, can we change the way that we're doing the intro for this? Or and they like to be really involved actually. So like quite a lot of the parts I ended up playing were ideas that they would sing at me. They go, oh, fill in the guitar, could you maybe, like, I can hear a lead guitar part that goes like this, and they'd sing me a line, and
okay,
go up, you know, which was kind of cool. I was like, that's actually a really sick line, actually. Yeah, okay, I'll put that in. I'll play that in. And so it's kind of nice. It's nice to work with an artist who they really care about what their show sounds like, and what it looks like. You know, the kind of the finished product. So yeah, that's kind of essentially how it works. And then there'll be lots of guitar parts that get programmed in, and I'll learn those. But Simon very much encourages to take that part and elevate it. Just like, if I can just program you, then I don't need you. But you're here because you're a real guitar player. So take that part and elevate it. Whether that's just the quality of the sound, the way you play it, maybe it's just embellishing a bit more on it. Sometimes he might have a very specific sound that he's going for, and he'd be like, no, I really want it to sound exactly like this. Can you play it like really as written? But there's not very many moments where he's that kind of specific. Yes. He's usually quite happy to let the players bring their own sort of identity to the sound to help elevate the whole thing. And I think that comes across in the final product. You know, it really does sound like a live band.
Yes.
A live group of musicians playing the tunes.
That's awesome. I mean, that's from a song perspective, but also I was thinking in my head, it'd be like a gear perspective as well. You'd be like, right, okay, what am I taking? What gear am I going to take? You must have been thinking about the gear and what you would take. Did you know straight away what you were going to go out with, or did you?
No, well, this was the thing. This was like a huge learning curve for me, actually. And I kind of, made a bit of a mistake with that with the last tour last year.
Right.
I'll explain what I mean. By then, I ended up buying stuff that I actually ended up not needing, and I tried to anticipate things unnecessarily early in advance.
Right.
So it kind of depends. Like on doing a big tour, there's loads of prep time, and they have that there for a reason. So they can make sure it's where they want it to be. But one of the things I'd try to do was anticipate the type of rig and guitar sounds that I thought I was going to need, I was going to use.
Yeah.
And so like I put this big rig together, and then actually in the rehearsals, it wasn't working for where we were going. And then that's when I ended up switching to the quad cortex, and then ended up moving to that. And I thought, oh, I've like bought all these amps and got my pedal board rewired for this new, and actually I didn't need to do that, and I could have saved myself like quite a lot of cash if I hadn't done that. But for the first tour, I kind of put together like the biggest sort of jack of all trades rig that I could think of. So I've been endorsed with Victory amps for a few years, well, quite a few years, probably 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah.
But I was using their new Super Dutch, well, they were new at the time, the Super Duchess heads, the 100-watt versions of the Super Duchesses, using those as a pedal platform with a G2 gig rig pedal board with all the Strymons, a bunch of different overdrive pedals, just to try and like have a huge variety of things. And at that point, I'd never gone down the modeling route. Like I'd already invested money over years into analog gear. And so like, and Kempers were still quite expensive. Like there was, you know, if you had a powered Kemper and a foot controller and, you know, it was like $2,500. And actually it was cheaper for me to just build on my analog gear with support from endorsing companies, and then use the 2 Notes Torpedo Live, because the Captor X didn't exist at this point, using the Torpedo Live as the silent cab to go direct to ears and direct to stage, which is how I did it on the first tour. And then that was kind of the way I was going to go for the second tour as well. But then I also had got a deal with Neural DSP and had a quad cortex, which I'd taken down to the rehearsals. Just in my brain, I couldn't reconcile doing a stadium tour on a tiny modeler rather than on an actual real rig. I just like psychologically, I couldn't quite wrap my head around that. But actually I ended up switching to the quad cortex. And the thing with those kind of gigs, like where it's all direct and it's in ears and it's like for a pop thing, but even though you're playing a massive stage, there's not actually a lot of space on stage. There's no space for a guitar rig or for a cab, you know. There's just like loads of screens and props and everything everywhere. So you're like, we're in this huge arena or in this huge stadium. I'm on this massive stage, but me and the keyboardist are still being like, oh, can we just shift across a little bit? Because we're just slightly in each other's space. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a weird thing. It's a really weird thing. But in that kind of environment, if you can't have a cab on stage, it's much more logistically complicated to have cabs under the stage, and you've got long cable runs and volume affecting crew. And, you know, if it was my band and it was my gig, then part of your budget would go into just making it work for you. But I'm there as a team member. I'm not there as the artist. So actually having a modeler is just much more straightforward, especially with in-ears as well. Like one of the things that people criticize about modelers is they say, oh, it's a little bit too clinical in the top end and it's a bit artifacty and things like that. But the reality is, like, if you're doing a pop gig, you kind of want that actually, because it's almost like someone's put some magic mastering dust over your guitar sound and suddenly you sit in the same space as the keyboardist. Your tone cuts like a keyboard sound cuts. You know, you sit with the tracks better. When it's being recorded, you know, it sounds much more processed, like it sits in with the tracks. And it just has that more polished sound, and that's what a commercial enterprise is looking for. That's they wanted to sound like that. So the Quad Cortex was just much easier to make that happen, and it meant I had a much broader range of sounds available for different parts of the set as well, because they've got a broad range of tunes and a broad range of styles that they cover in the live gig. Like some of it's really heavy rock, Van Halen style rock, like the start of the show is much more like that. Then they switch to Motown, then they switch to like classic pop ballad, then there's so there's a broad range of tones. So you might have like one analog rig that works really great for a sound, even if it's quite broad, but then you suddenly find yourself being like, oh, but I need it to sound like Hank Marvin in this particular tune, and I can't really. That's what they want, but I can't just make a Victory sound. Well, I can a bit, sort of. There'll be someone going, oh, but you can if you do the right, but only to a certain point. Whereas in a modeler, I can load up a brand new rig, just for that track, and I can make it really sit perfectly for that sound, for that song, just like a keyboard player would change patch. You know, that's the thing. So it's there's always a trade-off. So, but it sits easier in the ears. It's easier to hear yourself in the ears. The sounds are just consistent every night. It always feels the same, you know. And that's really important if you don't have cab behind you, where you're not feeling the air. You don't have that interaction between your pickups and your speakers and all that kind of stuff that makes guitar playing like really fun. You know, you have to sacrifice that bit, really.
What was there a moment though, Phil, where you thought, oh, this analog rig's not working for me? Like there must have been a sort of a point, was there, where you went, right, I'm gonna move across to the modeler? Was there a particular moment that there was something that didn't work for you, a particular song, and you thought, I'm gonna have to change, this isn't working? Do you remember?
It was the first couple of it was after the first couple of days of rehearsals, and you'll know this as a guitar player yourself. We're just very fickle with gear, right? We get bored and we change our minds with stuff. So I've been using the Victory stuff for a long time, and I really love the Victory stuff. They're an amazing company, and they've been an amazing support to me, and I'm super thankful. But I'd been enjoying listening to like old school rock stuff and getting back into that, and that really gnarly, aggressive Marshall kind of sound. Because the Marshalls are way more toppy, way more aggressive than a lot of modern amp companies. So I built a rig around some reissue JCM 900s, which are great sounding amps, but they were probably too aggressive for the gig. And everyone was like, oh, it's just so like, oh, in your face. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going for. And it was at that point where I was like, yeah, it's just too much. And like my MD was perceiving it as the guitar sounding thin and not feeling very full. And I was like, really? Because there's like loads of bottom end I've dialed into this. But actually just in the mix, because of that aggressive top end, the trick it plays on your ears is you feel like there's not as much of that mid-range bump happening anymore. And he wanted it, I think really he just wanted it to sound warmer and fatter and a little bit more like less classic, more modern kind of sounding. And it was at that point I thought, that's not quite the right sound for the gig in general. And that's when I went, okay, let me like rebuild the first, because we only done 3 songs at that point. So let me rebuild the first 3 songs in the modeler in a break. And the thing that I loved about the QC was, I sound like a sales pitch for QC. I promise I'm not. But just the thing I really loved about it was within half an hour, with very minimal tweaking, I managed to set up 3 rigs for those songs that was just working better for the sound that we were going for. And Victory would be pleased to know my MD was like, I wish you had your Victory amps, Phil. And there'll be maybe if they listen to this, there'll be a sound like, yes, we knew he should have used those. But yeah, that was the moment. So quite early on, actually, and that was the frustrating thing. I'd specced out way too soon, whereas our bass player, he'd brought a couple of options, hadn't nailed anything down.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking through that guitar tech and going, so what are you using? It's like, well, I'm not really sure yet until we start rehearsing. Like, it might be this, it might be this. We might say this, or I might send it home. Haven't decided yet. I thought, here's a guy who's done this before.
But your approach would be the one I would take, because I want to be prepared. Like, if I was doing that, I'd want to be over prepared for it. And then actually, the guy, the bassist who walked in and went, actually, no, I'm just trying a few things out. Actually, I haven't decided yet. In the end, that approach was the best approach in terms of like, see what happened, see what worked well in the mix, and come up with your rig that way. But
yeah, and that was the thing. That just kind of that's just like an experience thing with how many times have you been, like, how long have you been rolling in those circles? And that, and if it was, say he had the experience to know, well, we're preparing for a big tour, so I'm going to have space to play around and see what's going to be the right thing. If you're getting called in for a one-off session, you're going to do what we'd be more used to doing, which is, well, I've just got to have my stuff together. And especially if you come from a function background like I do, where there's never rehearsals, and especially if you're playing in high-end function bands where you're getting paid a lot of money and there's a high expectation that you have everything down, and then you go out and you play the event and you just make it happen. You're used to being in that headspace of, I've got everything fully prepared before I've even met the band, and go out, and that's why I get hired back, because I came in and I had everything ready to go and just did it. And actually, the nice thing about pop touring is it's a little bit less stressful than that. Actually, you do have a little bit more. But the thing that's good about that, if you come from that background and you go into doing pop sessions, is you'll be well equipped for last minute changes, accommodating things last minute. I remember on the first tour, the guys changing their mind about the acoustic medley, and like the last day of production rehearsal, I'm sat on stage with the earphone in my ear, learning the new version of the acoustic medley. Oh, wow. I'm thinking, flipping heck, we like start tomorrow and we're doing a new version at this point,
Yeah.
But I was used to having to do that kind of thing through doing function work. Just here's 50 tunes, turn up and play them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you use acoustic wise then? Is that through the quad cortex, or do you use something different for your acoustics?
I use something different. I had initially tried to do it through the quad cortex, but it didn't really work as well as I hoped it would. So what I use is a little impulse response loader pedal. Mm-hmm. I use the TC Electronic one. It could be anyone, but just with a acoustic impulse response. And then that goes into an LR Baggs Venue DI.
Right. And
then I also use an LR Baggs session compressor pedal, which essentially is a little bit like an analog like plug-in. So it adds a little bit of saturation to the sound and compresses your sound a little bit, so it's less boomy if you suddenly hit hard and things like that. But it also just notches out some of those annoying, the harsh, horrible acoustic frequencies you get with a DI acoustic, and it makes it sound just a little bit more natural. So the combination of those three pedals going direct to front of house sounds much closer to a mic'd up guitar.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been using. That's been a new thing. A friend of mine who he's a worship leader in a church and plays loads of acoustic all the time. That's his setup, and it's one of the best live acoustic sounds that I'd ever heard. So I actually nicked his rig.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are you using for that? Because I want my acoustic to sound like that and not like a plastic plinky thing,
Yes.
So it's quite simple, but it works great.
Yeah, sounds cool. I mean, is there any freedom, Phil? Like you said earlier about taking a cab and stuff. Could you have turned up with like 4 Marshalls, a wall stack full of 4x12s, or was there like no, Phil, you got this area of this is your bit of the stage, which is about a 212 cab distance that's long. You can't have walls of Marshalls. Were you allowed any of that or not?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you can bring it to rehearsals, but it won't make it to the gig. That's the thing. So I mean, on the first tour, I had cabs with me as well, and in the London rehearsals, I had those on, and the guys they loved that I was a loud guitar player, which was refreshing, because they wanted that rock and roll thing. And it was great because you could get all that controlled feedback and all of those really important things that make
Yes.
rock guitar special, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't get those when you don't have a cab or you're not near a speaker to get that interaction happening. But when we got into production rehearsals, I think we did still have the cabs, but they had to be switched off.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think they had to be, but that was the preference for the tour. So, you know, yeah. Yeah. So from that, I kind of, so for the last tour, I didn't bother taking cabs at all because I was like, well, they're not gonna get used, and then it's an unnecessary thing that has to get carted around.
Yes. Is that something as well? I was going to ask you, do you get like a crew of people that lug your gear around for you, or do you have to do, I'd imagine on a big stadium tour you would, but I may be wrong, you have to do things yourself, but...
No, there is there is a backline crew who are amazing, and they make life a lot easier, a lot easier. So so we have a dedicated drum tech and guitar tech who look after the instruments, make sure that they're all tuned up, make sure you know, if they need restringing and you know, or like the drums need new heads and stuff like that. So they will look after and maintain all the instruments, and they will set everything up for us. So one of the things that is really nice, is a luxury, is turning up to sound check for every gig and just your stuff is just there. And then you finish the gig and you hand the guitar back to your guitar tech and you're done, and that's it. And their job is to pack everything down and make sure everything's all right. But the thing is, like, on this last tour, I had 9 guitars, which included like backups for things as well. But there were 9 guitars that needed looking after. And I restring like every 2 gigs. I have new strings put on, which outside of touring I wouldn't normally do. But you do actually really notice it on a third show if you're doing your third gig on them, because things like your tuning consistency just isn't as bulletproof. And the thing as well, when you're playing that much, when you're doing that kind of thing, you know the show so well to like a micro level of detail that you hear every tiny little thing that moves off the path, whether it's a tuning thing or you play a slightly different note, and like your like what you consider a mistake changes. You know, so like normally, like, oh, I made a mistake because I played a wrong chord or I played a wrong note. Like when the show's that bedded in, you're quite unlikely to make that sort of mistake, actually. Like if you make that sort of mistake, it's because you've been wildly distracted by something that shouldn't be going on. So if you make a mistake like that on a tour, the first question people ask is, are they okay? What's happened to mean that they've made that mistake? Because that never happens. They never make that mistake. And occasionally, like, you will, like, you can't get through like a 30-day tour without making a slip here and there. It's just everybody will, you know, at some point. But a mistake might be, you know, you were supposed to play, I don't know, a sus2 chord, but you play just a straight major chord by accident, or do you know, an audience isn't going to notice that, but you're like, oh no, that's not the correct part. I wasn't supposed to, or you arpeggiate back to front, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like almost a detail that doesn't really have that much consequence, you know, to it. But you're just, your brain is so focused in at that point. Anyway, that was a tangent from what you were actually asking. I forgot what the original question was now.
No, that's fine, Phil. I'm just going to open out as well, because I always get deep into these conversations, I said to you earlier, and then I never ask if anyone has any questions. But if anyone does have any questions who's watching, then feel free to ask Phil. I will just check now. But also they can ask on the after on the comments as well if they want to. So if anyone who's watching has any questions for Phil, please do fire them away. And if Phil is still here, then he will answer them. But if not, he might just get tagged in the comments, if that's all right, Phil.
That's cool, yeah.
Tends to happen afterwards. Someone might have a question that they ask. One of my students did ask, though. They asked about your setup. and they asked why you had two quad Cortex, and I just said probably it's an A and a B rig, like a backup rig. And is that the reason why you had two?
Yeah, that is literally the only reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're not running one into the other or running two at the same time. You know, it's such a powerful unit. But when you're working on something that's high risk, you know, if the quad Cortex goes down, that's the whole guitar rig.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas like if a pedal goes down, you can get by on a different pedal or whatever. You know, but if a quad Cortex breaks, then you need to switch over. So what we'd set up was a little MIDI switcher that would bank up both quad Cortexes at the same time.
Okay.
And then my guitar tech built himself a custom AB switcher,
right,
that would, with one press of a button, would change the guitar input from quad Cortex A to quad Cortex B, and then change the outputs from quad Cortex A to quad Cortex B at the same time. So both lines would change. Because I'm going to be the first person to notice a problem.
Yeah, of course.
The sound guys don't have to do a change to a different channel or anything like that. I can just hit that button and just swap it over. So it's just a fail-safe thing really. But the whole gig was literally just a quad Cortex and one expression pedal and a tuner, and then a bunch of guitars, and that was it.
Keep it simple though, Phil. I mean, if it works, it's, you know, keep it simple.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I was just like, I can't believe how great this is.
When are you next out, Phil? When is Westlife back out again? Is the tour finished now, or are they going back out again soon? Or
yeah, good question. I'm not booked to do anything with them at the moment. I think they probably won't tour, like do a big tour, probably till next year at the earliest, I would have thought, because obviously we've had all of the cancellations with COVID and all of that kind of stuff. Last year was like a big catch-up tour for them, so they did a lot. So I think they'll probably leave it a little bit longer before they go out and do the next one. They've got a few one-off shows coming up, but quite often for those kind of one-off shows, they tend not to use the live band. If it's just like a gig somewhere, they tend to use track and kind of just do it, the four of them. Which, and when you're a four-piece boy band, you can kind of do that because there's four of you, and still visually, it's, you know, it still kind of works. This may be a bit hard for a solo artist to. They either need dancers to give them some support on stage, or they need their band to be there, at least as a very minimum, at least a visual boost for the show, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, and one other question for you, Phil. I'll let you go because I'm taking up your time. But are you allowed to, like in between now and you've got sort of, you know, waiting for going on tour potentially again, are you allowed to work with other artists? Are you allowed to do other things, or do you get sort of held on a retainer or anything like that for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it varies from gig to gig. I think most gigs, unless they know they've got loads and loads and loads of work in, they tend not to do retainers. So so I'm freelance, self-employed, so I'm just booked for the tour that I've agreed to do with them. And they will, when they've got a new tour coming around, I'll get a call from the MD and say, hey, we've got some gigs, are you available to do them? But as is the way with these things, that might happen, and I say, oh, actually I've agreed to do it, I'm booked on this now, so, and then the gig changes hands, or so that's kind of how it works. So, but you will always be, unless you decide to leave a gig, you'll always be the first call.
Yes.
You'll be the first call,
which is a good position to be in, isn't it? Like, it's a nice position to be in.
And it's good because in one sense the music industry is a bit like the Wild West, isn't it? There's like, so everybody's in the same position, so everybody is operating on good faith and honoring that that's your job, and that you're kind of dependent on it to a certain extent. You know, but at the same time, I remember one of the guys from the first tour that I worked with, he said to me, "No one ever gets fired in the music industry; they just don't get called back." You know, so if they decided that they weren't happy with you for whatever reason, they're under no obligation to call you back. They might call somebody else. You know, but yeah, that's generally how it works, I think.
Do you have any plans yourself, Phil? Like you've got things lined up or that you want to do, like personally, maybe own music or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, I am about to release some original music, which I'll be releasing through Jam Track Central, which will probably come out late June, early July. I'm just hopefully today I'll receive the final master, and I'm just finishing off like the video lesson side of things. But I've shot like a proper sort of playthrough music video style video for it. So that's kind of the main thing that I've been focusing on this year, and that'll be coming out really soon. It's called Eddie's Yard, so it's like a throwback. It's like a modern take on Shrapnel Records. So it's kind of a rock shred fest, but with a more modern aesthetic to it, I guess it's probably the best way. But that's been co-written with an old friend of mine, a guy called Ollie Steele, who I'm sure a lot of your viewers will know who he is. He was the guitarist in Monuments for 10 years. And he's just released a great track. So he's co-written the track with me. I've played all the guitar parts on it. And then it's got a guy called Anoop Sastry, I hope I've pronounced his name correctly, on drums, who's an American sort of like rock session drummer. Absolutely amazing. He's played with like Devin Townsend and Marty Friedman and guys like that. Really awesome player. And then a guy called Jacob Numansky, who's an awesome bass player. He's just done a tour with Intervals, and he's kind of really dug into that scene. And then the track has been mixed by Nolly Getgood from Periphery, as well. So I'm really excited about it. There's some really big heavy hitters on the track who are just amazing players. So I'm just thrilled that they agreed to be part of the project. So I'm excited for that to come out. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, I definitely would. So that's like, do you think late June, potentially early July for that to drop?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the earlier the better, I hope, but it just depends how quickly. I'm just waiting for one last piece of the puzzle, which is just a bit of artwork to come. So as soon as that comes, I can get everything packaged and then we'll be good to go.
Excellent. Well, Phil, like, it's absolutely lovely to talk to you, mate. Thank you very much. I do appreciate you for sitting down and speaking on the podcast. I think anyone watching this who's a guitarist is going to be information you've given is very insightful. So thank you for being so honest and open about things, how it all works in the industry, for working for a big artist as well. And, congratulations on it. You've got a fantastic, career. You've done really, really well for yourself. And what I find amazing, going back to what you said earlier, is you were literally on the cusp of, so that's a lesson for anyone watching. Like, you're on the cusp of saying, actually, this isn't working for me. I might, pack this in, sort of thing. And then, you went off on luckily to get the competition and things like that. So anyone watching who's, maybe feeling like that, then definitely don't give up in the music industry, because, you're a testament to what can actually happen. So, yeah.
Awesome. No worries.
Thank you, Phil. I said lovely to speak to you, mate, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Rich.
Cheers, Phil.